Two Babies in a Business, a podcast about business, marketing, growth strategy, staff clients, babies, and marriage. I'm Christina. This is Peter. We're founders and leaders of CIPR Communications. And Peter, we have a very special guest today.
We do have a very special guest, and it's an honor for us to have this guest on. And I will give a brief introduction, but I will say that this guest doesn't really need much of an introduction. Her name is Danielle Smith. She is now the president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. Prior to that, she was a radio host on the Chorus Entertainment Network. I think was a Calgary Herald columnist at some point, has contributed a lot to discourse and thought in Alberta in general. So if you want to learn more about her past and her background, you can find it all online. But Danielle Smith, it's awesome to have you join us today.
Well, thank you. It's so nice to see the both of you too. I feel like I've come full circle because Peter, when you and I met, you were at the Retail Council and I was at Canadian Federation of Independent Business. So we were both in business advocacy, and then drifted away and did other things. And here I am back in business advocacy. So
but we've had the opportunity and the good fortune to keep in touch through those years, and it's been awesome. So I mean, Danielle, we've pitched her on many earned media pieces, which is part of what we're going to be talking about today, and has been gracious enough to let actually myself and many of our clients onto her radio show to talk about many different topics. So that is a bit of an introduction to what we are talking about, because this is kind of I guess the final segment of our PR podcast series. And really we've been talking throughout all of this about the changing PR environment and the kind of evolution of PR over time. And so obviously Danielle has a ton of personal experience on this from all kinds of different angles and all kinds of different fronts. And prior to hitting record, we were chatting about a little bit of that. So why don't we kick off, Danielle, with why don't we just chew off that, just go right forward and just talk a little bit about, I'm curious personally, obviously you just left Chorus. There was some reasons you did that, and I'm very curious as to kind of, I guess if you can kick off by just kind of telling us about how
right into the controversy.
Right in there. We're just going to address it.
Right into the controversy. Well, let me tell you. Part I love talk radio. There's no two ways about it. When I was in between my two degrees, I took English and economics. And after I finished my English degree, I did what everyone who has an English degree does, went to Vancouver to try to my luck at being a movie star in the movie business, and ended up working as a waitress. At which point I said, I got to get back to school. So I went into economics. But at the time I wrote down some of the things I wanted to do in life. And one of them was to be a politician. And one of them was to be a radio host or a TV host. And so it has been a lifelong ambition. I loved Dave Rutherford. So it was really, talk radio has been really influential on me over the years. So I had such a wonderful time, and I would have stayed longer. But in the first 5 years, I pretty well had wide latitude to talk about whatever I wanted and to have on whichever guests I wanted. And then as soon as COVID hit, it was like running up against a brick wall. It became really difficult to do a whole range of topics. I felt constantly edited. I'm sad to say there was probably at least 36 topics I wanted to do that I was told I couldn't, and then got canceled. Some at the last minute. Like I had somebody lined up for a guest, and then I was told I wasn't allowed to do them. And then you have to fill the time. And it just became really too stressful. And part of the reason for that is that something strange happened on social media, and Twitter in particular, in the last year. I loved Twitter as a platform. I got onto it in 2009, but it now seems like it's dominated by bots, anonymous trolls, and people who are taking an effort to try to tear people down, that they want to analyze a political opponent or an ideological opponent, find one thing they say that they can turn into some Fire Danielle Smith hashtag. And sadly, it has an influence on the senior suites. It has an influence on advertisers. And it's an environment where it's impossible to actually have an authentic discussion, a sincere discussion, an honest discussion, and a broad-ranging discussion without constantly being at risk that your reputation is going to be destroyed by the Twitterati. So I just felt, you know what, I don't want to put myself through this. And so I decided to leave.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's actually kind of interesting how you frame that, because we've been talking for this entire podcast series about really how the world has changed in PR. It was changing over time, and then it really changed when COVID hit. And so you sort of mentioned that right then and there. So if you can elaborate, like, what about COVID hitting sort of in your mind kind of created that change? Is there anything you can point to?
There's a couple of things. So you've got the three big tech guys. So Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, and I guess you could add Tim Cook into the list if you wanted to, as well, but Jack Dorsey in particular. And they have given testimony in the US where they were talking about the influence of big tech. And Sundar Pichai in particular said that they would not allow any YouTube videos that contradicted anything said by Dr. Anthony Fauci. So if you think that through for a minute, and the number of times that Anthony Fauci has changed his mind on any number of recommendations, then you understand why it's become such a confusing world to try to get information out. There are a whole range of very credible medical personnel, doctors who've been trying to say that there's a different approach to COVID, and they've been shut down. And so here's what happens. So if you have the social media, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, editing, censoring, and deleting different accounts, then what mainstream media is going to pick that up? Because it looks like, oh my gosh, this person obviously must be crazy and over the line. Otherwise, why would Jack Dorsey have censored them? Or why would Sundar Pichai have censored them? So what you have now is that big tech, three guys who don't even have journalism degrees, are really dictating the coverage that you have in the mainstream media. So that's one aspect. Yeah. I think the other aspect is that, particularly in broadcast media, I mean, remember, broadcast media is so much more regulated than print media, although that's changing now as well. But I think what has happened in broadcast media is whenever an emergency has been declared, we look at ourselves as the means for government to get vital information to citizens. And so there's a bit of a blurring of the lines. The media is supposed to be the fourth estate, but when you get into an emergency situation, you have to be a conveyor of information. Now, when did we ever think a state of emergency would last for 15 months? And when did we ever think that a state of emergency would be led by medical doctors instead of trained emergency staff in emergency operation centers who understand all of the balances that they have to do? So I think what's happened is that the mainstream media has let us down. Their job is not to be a mouthpiece for government. Their job is to be the oversight of government, and we haven't seen that. If we did see that kind of oversight, then all of the doctors who are critical of the health of the chief medical officers, we'd be hearing them in the media. If we did have balance in our media, instead of having press conferences where Jason Kenney is asked over and over again, what more restrictions are you going to do? What greater lockdowns are you going to do? Are you going to have travel bans? Are you going to have curfews? You'd also say, why aren't you following what they're doing in Florida with Governor Ron DeSantis, who eliminated all the restrictions in September? Why aren't you following what Kristi Noem is doing in South Dakota, who also eliminated restrictions, or Texas or Tennessee? Like there would be that kind of balance, but I think the media's, quite frankly, lost its way. It doesn't really realize that its job is to be a watchdog, especially now after 15 months. And I think, unfortunately, that's been pretty well dictated by big tech. And I think that's only going to get worse, because now that you've got media chasing after the big advertising dollars that are all going to big tech, then it just means if there is some kind of revenue sharing agreement, then those three companies are going to have even more influence on the mainstream media. So we're in a dangerous zone, I think, where we're not going to get very good oversight of government and institutions, where the fourth estate is I think it's desperately eroded and it's not serving us well.
Interesting. Yeah. And that certainly, I mean, we've been talking on this podcast series about this idea of like earned media becoming more and more difficult for businesses to get their story out, tell their story through the ways we used to do it. You pitch the media on, hey, there's an energy company that has this great story. We have actually a client example where, pre-COVID, we pitched a story, international news, national news all over the place. We pitched a similar story, sort of next version of that story during COVID, like radio silence. It was like, if it wasn't about COVID, it didn't happen. And so, kind of different from what you're saying, but I guess probably it's all part of one big thing, in the sense that, like, if it wasn't about COVID, our client's not going to get picked up, period.
You know, it's so interesting you should say that, because I think you're right about that shift. I think there is, and maybe it's because everybody is busy chasing after advertising dollars now. Maybe what happens is every story is put through a lens of, should this person be paying for their time rather than us giving it away for free?
Right.
Because in radio in particular, we do have advertorial type of segments on the weekend, right? Where you do have different sponsors who will take on a segment, and then they're able to interview their own guests. And so I think in some ways radio has moved to that more quickly and has had that hybrid model. When I worked at the Herald, there was always the section on condominiums, for instance, it said these are paid sections.
Mhm.
And on television, I don't know if television's really gone that route yet, but it's
I don't think people watch TV anymore, do they?
maybe not. So I think that's the problem, is that everything is now being put through the lens of, should this person pay? Why would we give them free advertising? And so that then creates maybe an opportunity. I mean, I think the difference now is that the media used to be the gatekeeper. I don't know if you remember growing up. I'm probably a little older than you, but I remember you only had 3 stations when I was a kid, and you had the little, the antenna with the rabbit ears to try to make sure that you got the best coverage.
Yeah.
But what that meant was that watching TV was a scheduled experience, and everybody sat down to watch the evening news, and everybody received the same information. Now in this world, that doesn't happen anymore. My goodness, if you want to try to run a station where you expect somebody to tune into you when you're asking them to tune in, you're just not going to be successful. But it's never been easier to set up your own broadcasting network. I found that when I left the media. So I bought a $250 Blue Yeti mic and a $250 Logitech cam, $100 worth of lighting. My internet access is $97 a month, and I've been doing broadcasting from home for the last 2.5 months, almost seamlessly. And the technology is getting better and better with Zoom, with StreamYard is another one that I'm using. There's other software programs. Pretty soon, as soon as we get to 5G everywhere, I'm sure that we are going to end up with broadcast quality just from our own home studios. And so in that environment, do you really need a TV station or a radio station to be your gatekeeper anymore? I don't think you do. And so I think in some ways it's actually a lot more exciting. It's a lot easier to get your message out if you can get your own following, and you can get it out to a broader number of people than getting 10 minutes on the local radio station. So I'm looking at it as a real upside. I think that mainstream media is in real trouble, but the ability to get your own message out directly, it's never been better.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I'll let you speak in a sec, Christina. But what we've been talking a little bit about is this. The other kind of piece to this is now there's, whereas before you might pitch mainstream media, now you can pitch a podcast or a blog or a vlog or there's just so many more channels open and available to you. And in a lot of cases, maybe they don't have obviously as broad reach, but they might have a more specific niche reach and niche audience that might actually be great. So, from a strategy perspective, it just means more work up front on strategy, on thinking about your target audiences, on connecting who you're going to reach out to based on who their audiences and followings are and stuff like that. So it just takes more work up front, really. And then, probably need to have some paid budget considerations right up front, as opposed to before. Before it was sort of like scattered it out there, see what picks up, get some earned media. If that's enough, you're great. If not, do some other stuff. Now I think it's a little bit more, obviously, what can we do on our own? I think every company should be thinking about, we are our own PR channel now, and we need to basically think about multi-channel marketing in that sense. And we, need to become the authority on what we are all about and show the world that through PR. But, also, what kind of budget do I need to make sure that I reach that target audience in a meaningful way? Because nobody wants to work for free either. And I mean, to mainstream media's defense, I guess, they've been giving it away for free for a long time, which is why they're in trouble now, right? So I don't think the new media types are going to come in here and have the same attitude, because it's going to be, hey, well, I got to earn a living, right?
It's completely true. So I'll tell you what I've done. I kind of look at myself as my own media channel. And I signed up to a network called locals.com. So Dave Rubin is sort of a disaffected lefty in the US. He's a gay Democrat registered broadcaster who actually voted for Donald Trump, if you can imagine, because he thinks the progressives have gone off their rocker, that they're so far left. And so he created this platform, which is a combination Twitter. You can do short little snappy pieces. Facebook, you can do longer form with pictures. You can also post videos, and he's about to start a live stream on it. And so the way his model though is that it's a subscriber model. So each of his creators creates their own community and then asks people to join for $2 a month or $50 a year. And it's supported that way. And here's the numbers. This is the interesting part. So he has 1.6 million people who follow him on YouTube. And he says that of the 100,000 people who follow him on his locals channel, 10,000 pay, and it generates 4 times as much revenue for him. So it may be a smaller footprint, but from a return point of view, far more lucrative. And so that's one part. So I created a community there. But as the head of Alberta Enterprise Group, you have to think through. So knowing what you have just described, how difficult it is to get on any of the mainstream channels for any meaningful length of time. I mean, you'd be pretty lucky to get 5 or 10 minutes anywhere you go anyway. I just said, well, why don't I just create my own channel? So we're creating that channel for the Alberta Enterprise Group to do our own direct broadcasts on key issues for our members. Next week, for instance, I'll be talking to the forestry products guys, along with one of the union reps for the steelworkers, because they're engaged in a major battle against an environmental group in the United States, trying to shut down our Canadian industry. And they look at themselves as being a solution on the issue of getting to net zero. But do you think they can get their message out into the mainstream media? Well, if the mainstream media is not interested in that, then let's provide a channel for them to do that. So we're going to be doing those kinds of podcasts. And I also just started a show on the news forum. And so I'll be talking about energy issues. Today, we talked about Line 5 and what it's going to mean to the Ontario manufacturers, as well as to citizens, if we end up seeing Line 5 shut down and 50% of the oil supply in Ontario and Quebec, and 100% of the fuel to the Toronto Pearson Airport, and 100% of the propane to Atlantic Canada. What happens if that gets shut down? Like, to me, this is the real tragedy of the Twitter world that we're in, is that it has caused people to only be able to process information in 140 characters. And so we are focused and obsessively focused on trivialities when we've got serious issues that we are debating in this country and that we need to solve in this country. I mean, when you look at what happened this week, let me just put it to you this way. So you had Line 5 get an emergency debate, and I was looking for news coverage on it. Basically nothing. What else had an emergency debate? A rodeo in Bowden in Alberta that attracted 2,000 people. I even had CBC call me and say, oh, would you comment on this? Why are Albertans so unwilling to follow the rules? And I said, hang on a second. There were 100,000 people last weekend at a lockdown protest in Montreal. Randy Hillier in Ontario, he has regular lockdown protests, and he's even been charged because of it. The very first restaurateur to defy the law was Adam Skelly and his barbecue pit. So put it into context, 2,000 people at a rodeo in Alberta, and one church and one restaurant defying the law. Why are you trying to target us this way? Meanwhile, Ontario, you're about to lose your oil supply next week. You see what I mean? Like that to me is so frustrating. And that's the point. If the mainstream media is only going to focus on trivialities and only do gotcha style interviews, there's actually not really much value in doing mainstream media interviews if they're not going to pursue issues in a genuine, meaningful way, which they should, to try to bring context and get to the bottom of the issue. So they're going to have to change too.
Yeah. So it's definitely an evolving world right in front of us, right? Yeah. Christina, sorry, you were going to ask a question.
Oh, don't worry. No, I feel like you and I are usually on the same wavelength anyways. But Danielle, I'm really interested in this new role you're playing and the fact that you've embraced this, fact that you are your own media. You are that owned media source. And I think that that's great advice for other businesses out there in terms of how are you looking to get your message across. And so putting that hat on and knowing, where you've come from in that media landscape, what advice would you give that business or that organizational leader in terms of getting their message across?
You have to choose somebody who feels comfortable in the medium. Not everybody is comfortable in the verbal medium. And most of the time, you also get more opportunities to market if you're prepared to do video. I'm a radio person, so I prefer to do podcasts, but I recognize that by doing video, then you can push it out on a bunch of different platforms. And so that's what I would say is really just buy the home equipment yourself. Make sure you've got a properly designed set so that it's always so funny when you see what people's homes inside of their homes look like in Zoom, and you're thinking, oh dude, like you gotta believe you wish that you had some kind of backdrop there.
I got my book I'm writing. I'm writing a book and it's behind me right now as you speak about that. Yeah. And my children are right there. Yeah.
It's funny. Well, you should have seen, like I'll turn my camera so that you can see my wall was that color. And like, that's what my room looked like. But then when I started working with the TV people, they said, get a clean background and get your, you want to give the image that you're Albertan. Yes, but you also love Canada.
Yeah.
And then, you've got something in the background to give a little bit of additional color. And I'll probably do a little bit more. We're going to build the set out as we go, but you have to have good lighting as well. So I have a professional lighting that allows it to look like I've got sunshine on my face. I got a decent camera. I got a very good mic. Those are kind of the essentials, and it doesn't cost that much. As I mentioned, it costs less than $1,000 to do all of that, more closer to $500. So investing in making sure that you've got a professional look is really important. And then on top of that, there's some really cheap programs that you can use. A lot of people use Zoom, and Zoom is fine because you can make it afterwards. You can do some post production to make it look like a proper broadcast. But I've been using StreamYard as well. It's a $39.99 a month package, and it allows you to put the graphics in as you go. You can go live, and it can push it out to your various streams on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and then it saves it as you go. So it's a really simple way of getting your message out. And you wouldn't believe how many organizations are doing this. That's the thing that I think I've been most shocked about in leaving mainstream media. I don't think I've done any mainstream media interviews since I left, but I have done countless interviews with podcasters, with Canada Strong and Free, with the Modern Miracle Network, and there's all kinds of different ways that you can get your own message out directly. And if you have good content, then people will just tune in. I mean, anyone who's a good podcaster now started being unknown to anyone. Yeah. So if you are able to use the existing channels that you have to directly speak to people and interview really interesting people and have good conversations, that is worth gold. It's worth far more to do an hour-long meaningful interview on a topic that matters with a person and a thought leader of interest than to try to squeeze in for 2 or 3 minutes on mainstream media in a fragmented market. Because the other part too about doing the broadcast live is now your audience is the world. And if you've got the kind of company that isn't reliant on the local market, it's actually kind of better. It's better to be able to have your own channel and push it out that way. And I suppose at some point the optimal would be this, that people would be doing such interesting shows on their own that creates the earned media. That if you get a following and a really interesting guest, then the media might call and say, hey, can I talk to that person too? Because boy, that was a really interesting interview. And I hope that that's the way we develop, is that the alternative media space can be one where we're doing really deep conversations and really good investigative work, and then it draws the attention of the mainstream media so that they end up replicating what we do. I think that would be the perfect situation.
Yeah, and I think there's probably some examples of that actually happening. So that I think that is a direction things are going. And I'll just throw in another. I mean, I'm sort of talking about podcasting in general, but from a business perspective, the other thing you can do with podcasting is actually start with interviewing your ideal clients. And asking them about their problems. And it's amazing. So you not only get the content, but you also get a great learning experience from your ideal client, and like an opportunity to build a relationship with potentially your next client. And so it's like, there's so many positives from a business perspective, just podcasting or sort of one-on-one interviewing, it's amazing, right? So
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, I'm not sure what's going to happen over the next 10 years. I always enter media at the wrong time. So I entered into print media in the late 90s when blogs were all the rage. And so
right.
we got to a point of, why would I be paying someone to give their opinion in the newspaper when I can pretty much get it for free? And then I got into radio at the same time as the podcasting was developing
Right.
in earnest. And so it's the same kind of thing. Why pay somebody a huge salary to give their opinion when you literally can get it for free on the internet? And so I think that there's a real shakeup that's going to end up happening. When you look at, for instance, the most popular, well-paid broadcaster in the world right now is Joe Rogan. And who would have ever thought that doing a 3-hour long form interview with a single guest, who would have thought that anybody would ever be interested in that at all?
Right.
It's a format that the mainstream media never would have tried, never could have tried, because the model is completely different. You're trying to catch people in between cooking dinner and getting the kids in their bath and doing their homework, or in the morning when they're driving to work. You're trying to catch them for a 15-minute window. It's a totally different type of way of marketing. But now you have people, as they're doing their lawn work, or they're doing their housework, or they're driving, they'll just pop in an earbud and they'll be listening to a podcast. So you've got the ability to really capture the attention of people in a way that we simply didn't in the past. And all of this has really just developed, I think, in the last 5 years, but certainly it's accelerated in the last year or two. So I'm not all that gloomy about being unable, or how hard it might be to get into mainstream media, because I think there's just so much more opportunity to have your own channel.
Nice. Agreed. So we got to wrap it up. But before we do, I do want to ask you one quick question. We'll ask for a quick, I'll do the Danielle. We're going to commercial in 30 seconds. So you got 30 seconds to respond. But number one mistake you saw when people were pitching you for media stories when you're in that role? What is the number one pet peeve you had?
You know what it is? It comes mostly from the financial guys. And I probably wouldn't interview financial guys again, because rather than just talk about the issue, they'll say, and this is why you need to have a financial planner in your life. And they kept on saying that over and over and over again. You think, okay, yeah, I brought you on to talk about the issue of
Right.
interest rates or whatever it would be. And here you are just using my platform just to make a pitch for people to call your company. That's the number one thing.
Shameless self-promotion within
shameless self-promotion. You got to give meaningful content, and the business will flow your way.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because like the whole concept, I mean, you got to give before you receive, right? And that flows across everything you do in marketing, everything you do in communications, media relations, and probably in life. So good advice overall from Danielle Smith. It's awesome to talk to you about this topic. We could talk about this for 3 hours and go deep, but it's not the format of our show, so we're going to cut it off there. So thank you very much, Danielle.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Peter. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. And remember, if you are interested in this topic, there's a whole series on PR. This is episode 13. And so you can go back, like, and subscribe. It's CIPR Comms and Two Babies in a Business on Spotify, iTunes, and Spreaker. And yeah, Danielle, it was very interesting being on the other side of one of your interviews.
Thanks for the time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Take care.